I appreciate you joining. Just would love to hear a little more about you. How you got into, the industry you're in, and a little bit of your background.
Okay, I would say that, all right, so I was well, I am a naturopathic doctor, a physician. Practiced about 16 years in Southern Connecticut, initially for myself. So anyway, 16 years of medicine behind me. We, so that ended. I'll get back to the how and why and so on, but we moved to Cape Cod. So Southern Connecticut, Cape Cod's not very far away. You're in New Jersey, so you know that geography. And my wife had a brain tumor, so we're kind of recuperating from some major changes in life. And in terms of getting into e-com, we'll call it, it was like everybody else. Started with RA, and it's a long hike off of Cape Cod to get up to some of those stores. And in part, it was interesting how that was taking off. It was a whole new world to me, but part of me was saying, so I went to medical school to do RA, and we did what we had to do, and that was an interesting orientation. After that, we did pretty much a lot of wholesaling and did well, but I had a big poster on my wall about private label, kind of as the top of a pyramid, and I wanted to get into that and listen to various podcasts and webinars and so on, but I wanted to do it something that I knew about. So these two ideas are sort of obvious, but they weren't connecting for me. It seemed the obvious would be something like supplements, and that was huge and very competitive, and there wasn't anybody really to sort of tell you the steps other than the general private label. So about 2 years ago, we've been on a ketogenic diet for about 4 years. It's now a pretty trendy topic, but I started thinking, why don't I choose something there? I was going to medical conferences about the ketogenic diet, so I got to know all the speakers, mostly in the United States, but certainly internationally, and first name basis, and some emails and so on. And we basically just sort of developed. So I got to sort of see this whole thing is like exploding now, and we were sort of at the beginning of the explosion in terms of just being aware of it, nothing other than that. So I went on to find, one of our products, not a big secret, is C8 oil, C8 MCT oil. Mm-hmm. And that's very important, in my view, in a ketogenic diet. And I thought, well, in the very least, I want some for me. I want to consume it me personally. So I started a spreadsheet, and I started buying each product one after the other, and found out, none of the products are as advertised. And I thought, I'm disappointed in that. I didn't see it as a competitive advantage or a place to come in. I was disappointed that it wasn't truthful. And the message I was getting from Amazon was, that is of selling on Amazon, is that, if you have a pretty picture and you put the bucks behind marketing, and we know how sophisticated that's become, that you can do well. And it's sort of, kind of, I won't say it broke my heart, but coming from a place that I had a full medical practice, and we carried about $100,000 of inventory, from muscle chain and acupuncture and Chinese herbal medicine and other things. So you had this repository, and you took it not so much as a profit center, which it was partially, but as you had to have good quality. Every product in there needed to be verified, certificate of analysis. You needed to, that was the quality just to get in, and then you chose from certain companies. So from that, I said, what if we just make an honest product? It was, we're setting the bar pretty low. Let's just set an honest product. So what we learned, there's two things we wanted. I learned about this was MCT oil, specifically caprylic acid. There's such a demand for it on the palm oil that it's destroying Southeast Asia. And then I thought, well, maybe I shouldn't get into this. Maybe this is like, I'm not quite sure I want to be part of that demand. Well, there is a niche in that is sustainably harvested. So then we had to look for those suppliers. Where do you get that? What does that mean? How do you get certified? You have to get how do you get a manufacturer that knows that? So that was a learning curve, finding a high quality product, one that was sustainably harvested or supported that method. And then you find a manufacturer that deals with oils. And then we find out we have to get that manufacturer audited so they pass the RSPO. So anyway, I guess along the lines, we were doing, wholesale concurrent with that. And this was sort of our long-term project that we thought that someday it's going to take off. And there was a lot of learning and expenses that were way bigger than we initially scoped out. But I certainly knew the competitors, and I thought, if honesty sells, and if you can verify that what you have, I think that will be we'll at least be able to break even and then start to build. So that's kind of the nutshell to that transition. Why I left practice is that medical practice is a very, for the most part, unprofitable, do we say profit center? Business, period. The internet has changed things a lot, but if you go back now 20 years ago, it clearly was before the internet, even though my education was in Seattle, so we're there at the birth, more or less, certainly of Amazon. And that wasn't how we thought then. Being a good practitioner and being great at what you do was the thing you needed to focus on. So perhaps we were kind of naive. So these lessons morphed. We actually did well, built out a building, and then we bought a medical building, and then we rehabbed that. 2008 came along, and it wiped us out. Eventually, we had to declare bankruptcy because we had invested everything to rehab a medical building, and we held on for a number of years, longer than we should have. In the course of that, Judy, my wife, got a brain tumor. She had to be operated on. My brother died of multiple myeloma, and Mom had passed in bankruptcy. And I thought, I'm done. I'm just, I'm not, I really like what I'm doing, but it's way over our head. The money just got away from us. So we had to seal that up, move on. And that's how we got into e-com. And now I like where we're at, and we have ambitious plans to go further, obviously. And some of that, but that was basically how we came in part out of necessity and part out of wanting to make it meaningful.
So you did a great job, obviously, at finding a niche market that, was more or less untouched on Amazon, or at least not being done proproperly.
Knock on wood when you say that.
So far, until someone watches this.
Yeah, right. Thanks for that.
So you obviously, your product it's very, it's complicated with sourcing. How did you go about even starting that process of finding someone that was certified and meeting all of your requirements? Because there is a lot of trouble out there with bad sourcing and especially overseas, and working with people that are claiming to be certified and yet they're not. So having to do your own due diligence, how did you go about that process?
Short answer is a heck of a lot of phone calls and making mistakes along the way. We did go with one of those bad suppliers that we were actually ready to have our product bottled and on the market on Amazon last June. We didn't get there until really end of December, January this year, but all bottled, ready to go, and just had an intuition that I don't feel good about the oil that has been at the manufacturers for a while. It ended up that was the wrong oil. The difference is it was C8 as a fatty acid versus C8 as a triglyceride. It sounds like a technical difference. However, it would not exactly kill people, but it would be very bad for their guts, and they probably put a lot of liability. So that broke our hearts, because now at that point we had about $10,000 of oil that was unusable. And we had to resolve that situation. It's a whole chapter, but we had to resolve that situation, which taught us how to stick up for ourselves. Then that was just finding the supplier. First of all, finding the story of palm oil. We had the epicenter of palm oil is really Indonesia and Malaysia. And I used to live in Indonesia for a couple of years. I was in the oil field back before medicine. And so I wasn't intimidated by all that. And I was intrigued by this would be cool, and asked them, who are some of their suppliers? And you don't get a straight answer. They don't go, and here's our list. You just call Johnny at Bob's palm oil shop locally. It doesn't exist. And so you do a lot of calls, and you find, and they're pretty sophisticated. I mean, these companies make a lot of different forms of oil for a lot of different products and cooking and so on and so forth. And so they're not just simple, dumb companies. And so you have to drill down. So I realized the level of the product they were going to give me, the oil eventually they're going to put in a drum to me, was not going to be at the quality that I thought would be noteworthy. So it came from one of the medical conferences that we were, I told you I got to know a lot of the speakers. One doc is very big in brain research and the fats of the brain and so on. And he did what they call a poster. And one of the presentations, posters are kind of out in the hallway. It's not a full presentation. And he had a poster on caprylic acid triglyceride. I thought, well, and it was great results about making ketones compared to other things. And that's the whole reason why one would take this. And so I asked him where his source was. And he claimed it was 100%. It's 99.6. It's quibbling for some, but I got to be exact about what we're doing. Otherwise, it gets to be a little bit vague and things slip away. But that's where that started. But then I now had to educate our manufacturer. So we found a manufacturer, and I convinced them for the first year, it's like, guess what? You need to be certified in RSPO, which is Roundtable for Sustainable Palm Oil. And that was about $4,000. So we ended up paying them. So now you have to find a company that does this, that goes to them to go do this. And now we're like, this is getting to be a long project, and my wife's saying, do we still really want to continue with this? So that's pretty much where it started. It was just putting in that due diligence. And this was the portion of the day that I thought was more creative than the dreariness of the wholesale that we no longer did RA. And so it was scheduled time that I just call it research. I could do creative research for the future. So there's spreadsheets, and I knew that, and I could follow how they're doing on Amazon. And I always just felt one foot in front of the next, and eventually it's going to turn into something. So that was 2 years ago. So it certainly is not the smartest guy in the room to pop things out there. I mean, it's 2 years. How many people spend 2 years to come up with a product? Nobody.
It's a long time.
Yeah, right.
So you're doing something I'm a huge fan of that I always try to tell a lot of sellers this. I'm personally not a fan of advertising off Amazon and pushing traffic to Amazon, mainly because Amazon takes enough of your margin. They have plenty of fees. You don't need to pay them more. But you're doing a more relatively free organic approach with your Facebook group and with some podcasts and things like that. So you're doing what you can really to develop, a real community as opposed to just buyers. So can you tell me a little bit about that?
That's a good point. That's interesting. Yeah, I love the word organic. We can use it in so many different levels. Well, it came from the idea, you get so tied up, back to the product selection and the work that I was doing. And the premise was, what if you just be honest? Is that marketable? And verify your integrity, of the product. So along with that approach was, I really do like ketogenic diet. There's plenty of Facebook groups out there, but I thought none of them had the physician's perspective of saying, these are the, it's not bizarre, it's not unusual. These, from the lab tests, and also speaking from a point of collective illness. There's a couple chapters I left out. And so to come from that place and say, I'm here as a patient, I'm here as a doctor, and this is what I'm doing. And I think you really ought to know some basic things. And this is actually a remarkable shift. So I started it for me. There was Anthony and Kevin. I went to a couple of days of their sessions, mostly for my wife, who was into merch. And these guys are so in your face, it's like.
On that, actually, Anthony and Kevin are our guests next week. So they'll be here. Yeah. Yep. So they'll be here, and everyone will see what you're talking about.
Absolutely. So we're at dinner, I think the first night, and we're all squared around this big table, and he goes, "We've been thinking Carl should start a podcast." I'm thinking, are you freaking kidding me? Podcast? I don't even have a microphone, and I don't even know what to do about it. So their sound guy, Brian Rodriguez, he hiked me down to Anthony's room. You know how they're set up. Anthony's room, and said, "Go start them." I'm thinking, this is all it takes. Of course, he has all the sound equipment in the world. So we popped the first episode out, which is very brief, kind of totally off the top of my head. And it was Anthony's sort of New Jersey, half gangster, half total street grit, saying, "You got to do this. I see a following, and go do this." And go off and do the rest of your life, but have this part be done. So I struggled to figure out that, buy equipment and tie it up around the desk as I have here. And Brian's become, I don't know, a real help with his knowledge. And so that's started. The Facebook group was started, I believe, a number of months before. And that, again, was just out of, I think, some woman someplace that we got to know, probably through e-com, said, you ought to start your own Facebook group. I'm thinking, it looks like a lot of work, and I'm not quite sure I can keep up. So that's grown. We're over 200 now, and it hasn't been with any we do no advertising. There's a closed group. And I thought, I'm just, anybody can join. Closed just means people can't peek in and see what you're talking about unless they're a member. And so the origin was be consistent in all these things. And so we got that going out, and every so often there's a few YouTubes that are more of snippets of a document that I think needs to have an audio with it. And so it's grown from there. We're now at the point, we hope to actually do some research with one of the top guys in the ketogenic field, Dominique Agostino, who's down at the University of South Florida, because I now feel our product, so our oil, so we call it C8, but it's not exactly C8, the C8 triglyceride. Mm-hmm. I think with all this emphasis on what they call exogenous ketones, that I think a lot of that is not necessarily untrue, but I think it's hyped by a factor of 100, and it's not appropriate for everybody. And so then back to that doc that I first sort of saw that poster from, he wasn't a doc, he's a PhD up in Sherbrooke University in Canada. I followed up with him. I said, it's just because you do your own glucose readings, your own ketone readings, and you get to be intimate with your life, and C8. So I called him and I emailed him. I said, this is just my feelings, but I have tried exogenous ketones, and I think C8 is way more than that. He goes, no, I think you're right. He said, we don't have a lot of studies on that. We just have one day of a few people that came in and we did this, and that's our feelings as well. So I'm thinking, I could be sitting on a gold mine here, but research is everything. How do you get to pay for research? It's like, talk about a wicked overhead cost. So
yeah, really.
We're gonna find out this week what that will cost, and it might be crowdfunding, but it's a great idea. We'll see where it goes.
Yeah.
It's in the very least, it keeps a Facebook group alive.
Yeah, there you go.
Podcast. But that's been the gist of it. It's been sort of culling these things together. I'm not very organized on it. I'm certainly not very knowledgeable about it, but we have the content down, and we'll just keep it growing. So my guess is, heaven forbid, if a year from now that group's at 1,000, because then it will demand its own attention, and you hire it out, and it gets to be that level. And I never really had that intention. I didn't have the intention of, oh my gosh, I want to get to 5,000 and max out my. I don't really care. If we're making enough money, be authentic, and that's pretty cool.
Yeah. Well, you're a great success story of finding a problem and for your sake making a product and putting it on Amazon, as opposed to a lot of these other sellers who just look up to see which products are doing well and then they just replicate it and private label it, but end up just struggling and having tons of competitors. But you found a niche market, and you found a need, and it's definitely working. And you're off Amazon traffic, your Facebook group and your podcast is proving that there's a market there and people love it, and you don't have to be spending thousands upon thousands of dollars on Google shopping ads and things like that if you can find the right audience and find the appropriate way to speak to them.
I'm figuring, it's actually, so what, all this sort of, my context is pretty old fashioned, do it, speak it. And by the way, the podcast and the Facebook serve different purposes, because the podcast can be, I actually have to write not a script, but an outline of what I want to talk about. It can't be always that extemporaneous, but I can fit that into the conversation of Facebook, of an elaboration of something or other in a topical issue. There's something else that you'd mentioned that, I think that will grow by itself. And, it can really be boiled down to is find one thing, do one thing, do it better than anybody else, and you'll succeed. Well, there's a lot of belief in that statement. I mean, that's like, we all want to believe it, but it's like, how much money are you going to invest in doing it before it catches on? Now we're at the funding. We quickly whipped through the first shipment, more or less, besides some initial troubles with somebody trying to challenge us for what they call a common law trademark, which didn't hold up, and got an attorney for all that. What we anticipated was 3 months worth of well-researched inventory will take us to go through. We kind of ran out in less than a month. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, that means if this is from China, we could double and triple it. But this is not. This is, even though the oil comes from Southeast Asia, it's expensive stuff. And you, from 1,000 to 5,000 is, like 20,000 to, there you go, not much less than 100,000. If you want to go to 10,000, we're dealing under $200,000. 150, 200,000. We obviously hope we get a price break and all that other stuff, economy of scale, but big bucks, and but this is what we're chipping away at. And you've been helpful on a number of accounts by some referrals. Payability, by the way, has been real stand up. They're cutting their teeth on us, and we're doing that on them as well. But
that's great. We love the guys over at Payability. They're awesome.
Yeah. Very, very helpful. Very helpful.
Yeah.
So that's pretty much it. I would say I'm an anomaly. I don't know if there's a pattern to follow other than if we all have something, obviously I needed to know about the ads and all these other tedious things to make it work, and the listing, and then the scripts and the bullet points, and the keywords and the index, blah 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 blah. And so that's the part that was both exciting and bored me to tears, because it was so technical and it didn't have a substance behind it, right? And so hankering for something deeper, and that's kind of what we're marrying together now. But I think everybody might have that same kind of hankering. And I guess the deeper voice doesn't snap forward fast and find you that thing. There's usually a lot of work. At least it's proven that way for us. So, if that's a lesson, if that's something you can pass on, it's kind of non-technical, but your service has obviously been very helpful. It certainly has given me the time to go, really, it's like you're part of the team, and it's just nice to go, I don't have to do that anymore. I would have spent way too much time, and that wasn't like satisfying my life in any way.
Yeah. Well, you can outsource tons of stuff. Obviously, we help you, full disclosure, we help you with your PPC and your listing optimization, things like that. But you can't outsource, the passion. You can't outsource yourself. You can't outsource an influencer. So you can't hire someone to do a podcast for you, or you can, but it's not going to be that good. And you can't really hire someone to run a Facebook group for you if they don't know anything about the market. So, you're doing a great job at handling the stuff that, you can keep your face on, you can keep your, your finger on your own brand, and we help you out on the side.
Yeah, I agree. I would say if there was something incidental, these inflection points of when people go left instead of right, and why it all works out. One of the inflection points was Anthony and Kevin's, really blunt way of getting in your face and saying, this is what I see. And they say, we're not stupid. We're pretty learned in our world, and this is what we see, and this is what. And so when somebody speaks into your life that way, as good guys as they are, and I mean, they are good guys, not there wasn't any doubt in there, you tend to listen. And so that was helpful.
Yeah, they're great. I'm looking forward to having them on the show next week. They're an interesting couple of guys, so it'll be a fun conversation.
For sure.
But Carl, I really appreciate you chatting with us. I'll let you go ahead, close it out. You can tell everyone where they can find your stuff if you want.
Oh, okay. Great. So you can find us on Amazon, surprise, surprise. And the name of our product is called C8 Keto MCT oil. And it's a product that, for those who are interested in a ketogenic diet, which is not everybody, by the way, it's just an intense, generally pretty well-informed group. It helps you get into ketosis for a number of reasons. And so that's why we like it. Facebook group is called Keto Naturopath, and naturopath is NATUROPATH, so Keto Naturopath, 2 separate words. And the podcast, which has started coming out, I think we're in episode 6 or 7 coming out, is also called Keto Naturopath. So that should help you find me.
Thanks, Carl. I appreciate it. Have a good one.
Take care, Andrew.